At 95 years old, Clint Eastwood, the rugged cowboy, the steely cop, the man who built a career on silence and strength, uttered a confession that stunned even those who thought they knew him best. With a voice softened by time, but sharpened by memory, he said only 9 words. "She was the only one who could do that to me." For a man who has faced down outlaws on screen, directed Oscar-winning dramas, and survived decades in Hollywood's brutal spotlight, this wasn't a statement about fame or fortune. It was about something far more dangerous: love. The question, of course, is who was she? And why did this one woman leave such an unhealable mark on a man who spent nearly a century mastering control? Today, we're peeling back the myth of Clint Eastwood, the unshakable gunslinger, the grizzled anti-hero, and uncovering the truth about the woman who broke through his armor. A love so passionate, so chaotic, and so haunting that even at 95, Eastwood couldn't stop talking about her. But to understand why this one confession matters so much, we first need to see the man behind the myth. Clint Eastwood's story didn't begin with the glitz of Hollywood, but with the grit of survival. Born during the Great Depression in 1930, he grew up moving from town to town, watching his father labor as a steelworker and learning early that nothing in life came easy. Those years carved into him a sense of independence and toughness that would later define not just his career, but his very image. By the late 1950s, Eastwood stepped into the spotlight as Rowdy Yates in the TV Western Rawhide, but it was the infamous Man with No Name in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns that cemented him as a cinematic icon. Quiet, brooding, merciless when he had to be, Eastwood's screen persona was the very definition of control. Later, as Dirty Harry, he became the symbol of hard-edged justice, a man unshaken by politics or pain. Audiences adored him not just because he played heroes, but because he played men who never lost their grip. Yet behind that myth was a man very different. For all his fame, power, and roles, Eastwood's private life was marked by something no camera ever caught: the quiet turbulence of love. And while he had countless romances, there was one relationship he never truly walked away from. In Hollywood, Clint Eastwood quickly built a reputation as more than just an actor. He became a modern-day Casanova. His tall frame, gravel voice, and undeniable charisma made him magnetic both on screen and off. Over the decades, his name became tied to a long list of women: actresses, musicians, models, even journalists. The tabloids couldn't get enough of him, painting him as the man who could never be tied down, the eternal bachelor whose affairs often overlapped. Yet Eastwood rarely flaunted these relationships. He carried them with a mix of secrecy and mystery that only heightened the fascination. He married twice, fathered at least 8 children with 6 different women, and seemed to glide effortlessly through the chaos of scandal. Fans saw him as untouchable, someone who could balance stardom, politics, music, directing, and love without ever letting anyone see him falter. To the world, Eastwood was always in control, always the one who left before he could be left. But in 1975, all of that would change, because that year, a woman walked onto one of his movie sets, and for the first time, the man who built his life on never losing power suddenly found himself powerless. Her name was Sondra Locke. To some, she was a sharp-tongued actress with a streak of independence. To Clint Eastwood, she became something else entirely. They first met on the set of the Outlaw Josey Wales, and from the moment their eyes locked, something shifted. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, it was explosive. Sondra wasn't like the women Clint had known before. She wasn't content to orbit around his fame or play the quiet companion. She had her own career, her own ambition, and the mind as razor-sharp as his. She challenged him, pushed him, and refused to be intimidated by his myth. To Clint, who had spent years being idolized, This was both thrilling and terrifying. Their romance ignited quickly, blazing into something that consumed them both. Soon, they were not only lovers, but collaborators, starring together in films like The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, and Sudden Impact. Hollywood saw them as a power couple, but behind closed doors, their relationship was anything but smooth. It was passion, it was fire, and it was chaos. And for the first time in his life, Clint Eastwood wasn't the one holding all the cards. For 13 years, Clint and Sondra's relationship was a storm, passion that burned bright but also left scars. Together, they shared creative triumphs, laughter, and moments of tenderness. But at the same time, Clint's old habits didn't vanish. Even while deeply involved with Sondra, rumors swirl of other affairs and hidden children born during their time together. Sondra, sharp and perceptive, wasn't blind to it. Their love, as powerful as it was, carried the seeds of destruction. Still, for over a decade, they stayed bound to each other, sometimes in love, sometimes in conflict, but always unable to fully walk away. And then, it all unraveled. In 1989, their relationship ended in a bitter storm of lawsuits and accusations. What had begun as artistic partnership and deep romance descended into claims of deceit, betrayal, and sabotage. For most men, this would have been another breakup, another chapter closed. But for Clint, it was different. He would later admit that when it ended, something in him collapsed. He said, "I couldn't walk after." And he didn't mean physically, he meant emotionally. For a man who had built his life on strength, that kind of collapse was unthinkable. And yet, it happened. When Clint spoke about the aftermath of losing Sondra Locke, his words painted a picture of a man who, for once, had no script to follow. He described it not as heartbreak, but as paralysis. The end of their relationship left him hollow, unable to move forward, unable to function in the same way he had before. "She broke something in me," he reportedly confessed to a close friend. For someone who had fought through Hollywood's cutthroat world, survived scandal, directed Oscar-winning films, and maintained control over every aspect of his life, this was staggering. Clint Eastwood, the man who had survived nearly everything, admitted that he never figured out how to fix what was broken. He had spent decades crafting roles where he was untouchable. Dirty Harry never wavered. The man with no name never stumbled. But behind the legend was a man who had been brought to his knees, not by enemies, not by Hollywood, but by love. And the question that haunted him, even years later, was why Sondra Locke, of all the women he had known, was the one who could undo him so completely. The answer lies in who Sondra Locke was, not just to Clint, but in her own right. Unlike many of the women in his past, Sondra wasn't dazzled by his fame or silenced by his power. She stood up to him, challenged him, and demanded to be seen as his equal. She saw through the myth of Clint Eastwood, stripping away the cowboy image and exposing the vulnerable man underneath. She had a sharp wit, a strong will, and a mind that wouldn't bend. To Clint, this was both intoxicating and destabilizing. She made him feel things he didn't want to feel: hesitation, doubt, tenderness. She disrupted the control he had worked so hard to maintain. And perhaps that was why her departure left such a lasting scar. Because it wasn't just that he lost a lover. He lost the one person who had seen him fully and who refused to be blinded by the legend. For Clint Eastwood, who had lived a life defined by control, Sondra Locke represented the one place where control slipped through his fingers. Now, as Eastwood sits in the twilight of his life, surrounded by awards, scripts, and portraits of his long career, it isn't the trophies or the accolades that seem to haunt him. It's her. Not the lawsuits, not the scandals, not even the betrayals. What lingers are the quiet moments, the way she looked at him when no one else was around, the way she could make him laugh, or the way her silence could disarm him more than any argument. At 95, With nearly a century behind him, Clint Eastwood admits that he still carries her memory, that despite everything he's lived through, Sondra Locke remains the only person who ever left him truly shaken. For a man who built his identity on strength, it is a striking reminder that even legends bleed, and even the strongest hearts break. He once said, softly, almost to himself, "She was the only one who could do that to me." And the weight of those words proves that some wounds never close. Clint Eastwood's life has been a story of grit, survival, and reinvention. He's been a cowboy, a cop, a mayor, a director, a father, and a legend. He's faced war, fame, politics, and scandal. Yet, for all of that, the most powerful force in his life wasn't Hollywood, wasn't fortune, and wasn't even success. It was love, or more precisely, it was the loss of it. His confession about Sondra Locke isn't just a rare glimpse into his private life. It's proof that no matter how strong, how famous, or how unshakable a person may seem, love has the power to undo us all. For Clint Eastwood, the man who played heroes and lived like a giant, his greatest legacy may not only be in film history, but in the haunting truth he admitted at the end. She was the only one who could do that to me. And that reminder, that even the toughest men can be broken by love, may be the most human role he ever played.